The BC Lions visit the Blue Bombers on Saturday for the West Final. Winnipeg is favored by 4.5 points after resting last week, while the Leos clawed the Stampeders as Vernon Adams Jr. recorded 413 passing yards and 5 total touchdowns. Can the Lions pull the upset, or are the Bombers heading to a 4th straight Grey Cup?
I backed the Lions last year, and I'm going to back them again this year because this team, in the right moment with the right conditions, when their quarterback is on, can beat anyone in the league. We saw it earlier this year when they smoked the Bombers. Come on now. Now, even
anyone in the league? They haven't beaten Toronto?
In a one-off game, anything can happen. Would I pick Toronto in that matchup? Yes, I would currently pick Toronto in that matchup. But I think BC, pound for pound on offense at least, is slightly more explosive than Toronto. Toronto is deeper across the board. They're the most complete team, but BC's passing attack is more explosive than Toronto's. I don't think that's too controversial to say. They've got the best receiving core in the league, and a guy who, had he had the performance he had in the playoffs in the last week of the regular season, would be the front runner for the MOP trophy in Vernon Adams Jr., because that performance in the West semifinal was as good a game as I've seen from a quarterback ever. And VA has had some great games this year. This isn't the first time he's been over 400 yards. He has been exceptional, but there was something different about that game. From start to finish, he was on. There was maybe 2 throws in the entire game that you can point to and say, oh, he'd like that one back. That was a poor decision or a poor throw. Everything else was either a wise throwaway or on the receiver or an on-point ball. And there were some incredible throws. He was feeling it. He was in the system. He was using his legs to his advantage. I will say this, and this might be a little bit hyperbole. As good as VA has been this year, there hasn't been a moment in any of those good games he's had where I went, well, that's as good as Nathan Rourke. Nathan Rourke is obviously a cut above. What he did was exceptional. There were moments in that game this past weekend where I sat there and went, wow, this is as good as some of the games Nathan Rourke played last year. I think his performance was that good. He was feeling himself that much. And you can criticize it all you want, Dunk. You can call him a head case. You can point to all the past things. But to his credit, he came off a bad performance against that same opponent and an awful week of practice. Everyone who was present told me that VA was throwing picks left and right in practice. He looked absolutely awful. And he found his mojo for that game. He settled in, and from start to finish, he was absolutely excellent. If he can do that against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers next week, it's going to be really tough for that team to beat them.
You know, a lot of what you said is warranted, but let's not put Vernon Adams Jr. on the same level as Nathan Rourke. Okay?
I'm not putting him on the same level overall, but for that game, for that
not
moment,
even for a game. No.
It was damn close.
No. Okay. What I want to see is, how does Vernon Adams Jr. respond the first time Willie Jefferson or Jackson Jeffcoat or Adam Big Hill plant him on that frozen tundra at IG Field, and he gets up and the wind's blowing, perhaps some snow is moving around there. Does he bounce back to his feet? Is he slow to get up? Does he look cold and brittle after that? Because that is the difference in this game. It's fine, well and good to have 5 total touchdowns against a pretty terrible Stampeders team for most of the season in the Western semifinal. But to go out to Winnipeg in the cold, in the elements, where Vernon Adams Jr. throughout his career hasn't necessarily been too good and really hasn't even had that big of a sample size in these moments, I'm picking the Blue Bombers. They know how to get it done. Brady Oliveira is an absolute sledgehammer, especially in the fourth quarter. And that hurts even more when your sledgehammer is frozen and just beating away on that front. I think that is a key difference in this game, is that Mike O'Shea is going to win that field position battle over and over and over again, and that the Bombers can consistently run the football. I give the quarterback edge to Zach Collaros, as many people know in this game. I would actually argue that the Blue Bombers receiving group is better. Yeah, I said it, better than the Lions. And I think overall, Winnipeg has a better defense. So to me, I think this game could be a win by margin from Winnipeg.
Dunk is wrong about the receiving core. Winnipeg's receiving core is not as talented. Part of the reason why is Dalton Schoen is still out with an ankle injury. If he does play, he will not be at 100%. However, JC is wrong about his prediction for this game. And the reason is he's a soft West Coast mama's boy.
He said it.
Who has no appreciation for what actual weather is like. The forecast for this game is -3. That's the high with the mix of sun and cloud. And the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are probably hosting all kinds of bizarre ceremonial rituals at midfield of IG Field at off hours, trying to summon even worse weather. Because the worse the weather is for this game, the better the chances of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers winning this game. The BC Lions have been completely incapable of running the ball this season. They are the worst rushing attack in the league. That offensive line has broken down at inopportune times. And defensively, Ben Hladek could miss this game in the middle of that defense, which has been undersized and been run over at times this season. If this game was in the Dome, and you could rewind the tape and go back a month ago, if this game was in the Dome, I'm happy to pick the BC Lions because they'd be coming off a bye, and that Dome is where the BC Lions are built to have success. They are not built to have success on IG Field. I'll use a car analogy. The BC Lions are bringing a Lamborghini to a Hummer race, okay? The Winnipeg Blue Bombers are driving a Hummer. They are built to win this game. And I will also say this about Vernon Adams Jr., because, JC, you've been banging this drum, and a bunch of other media, well, I say a bunch of other, there's like 4 media types in, Western Canada these days, it feels like. But there have been a bunch of media in Vancouver where every time VA plays well, it's like, see, guys, he's really good. And the answer is, we all know that. Literally nobody thinks that Vernon Adams Jr. stinks. He is a top 3 quarterback by anyone's measure. Everybody knows that. And if he comes into Winnipeg and wins, good for him. I don't think that would shock anybody. Vernon Adams Jr. is not Taylor Cornelius, and nobody talks about him like he is. We talk about him like he's a top 3 quarterback. Can we stop throwing a parade each time he throws a touchdown pass? Like, let's just calm down and take a breath. But for this week, given the weather, given the circumstances, given the rest Winnipeg's had, the coaching staff, go ask Nathan Work what it was like to play at IG Field last year. Go ask Cody Fajardo. The Riders won the turnover battle, the West Final 2 years ago, something like 6-1, and they lost the game. Like you talk about the noise at IG Field. You talk like I'm there in the press box, feeling the reverberations of the crowd on my feet as I'm trying to write my game story. That environment is different. It is the best home field advantage in the CFL, not by a small margin, by a considerable margin. And that's why I believe the Winnipeg Blue Bombers will win. I also think they can cover. And again, year before, the Bombers did not play very well in either of those West Finals. But when you combine the crowd and the weather, my goodness, they are hard to beat for that game.
There's no arguing that IG Field is the most hostile environment in the CFL at this stage. That is absolutely true. But the weather on that forecast doesn't really scare me because it's just cold. If there's no precipitation of some form, I think the BC Lions...
But you're even telling on yourself. You think -4 is cold. You are telling on yourself, my friend.
It's not that cold.
You are telling on yourself.
It's not that bad. And if there's no precipitation, if there's no snow, if there's no rain, if there's no sleet, if it's not crazy windy, I don't see how that level of cold, which again, as you yourself admit, is not that cold, will have any effect on the BC Lions offense. And yes, if you were to go into that situation for the very first time, it would be shocking and it would be unsettling, and you'd have to adapt to that. That much is absolutely true. But these BC Lions, were there in that same stadium in these same conditions last year, as you yourself pointed out. And yes, I think the cold had a little bit of an effect in that game and threw some people off. I talked to Josh Woods, who had an outstanding game at linebacker in the West semifinal. And he mentioned how, as a California kid, he'd never experienced anything like that playoff game in Winnipeg before. He said, it was shocking going into that environment for the first time. I didn't know what it was going to be like. But he's experienced it now. And he said, once you got it, by the fourth quarter, it had gone away. It's out of your mind. Like, it doesn't have an effect anymore. And now going in, understanding what that's going to be like, understanding how you have to prepare for that is going to be huge, because as veteran as Winnipeg's group is, BC's group is pretty much intact from last season. There's not a lot of new pieces. This is a whole team that was in this circumstance a year ago and ultimately came very close in that game with a late surge from Nathan Rourke. I think if they can come out flying, they can win this game. Now, if VA stinks out the joint in the first quarter and Winnipeg's able to run the ball, this game is over, right? We will know what the result is going to be very early on. But if this offensive attack can go out and throw the ball around the yard, I think they have a huge shot at an upset.
There's so much going on here. First of all, it's not that cold for people on the prairies. JC, out here in Vancouver, there's people wearing winter jackets.
It's very cold
and
for
it's
the
like
BC Lions.
10 degrees. Exactly.
Correct.
It's very cold. There's winter jackets being worn out in Vancouver, and it's 10 degrees.
What do you think about all the rain?
In
fairness to the Vancouverites, when you spend $1,500 on a winter coat you need any excuse to wear it, don't you?
All right, let's go through the receiving corps, because if I had to take these guys, especially in the playoff situations, Kenny Lawler or Keon Hatcher, give me Kenny Lawler. Nick Dembski or Alex Hollins, give me Nick Dembski. Like, where am I wrong here, boys?
Amik Rhymes is better than Drew Wolatarski. How about that?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's true. But if Joan was healthy is more what I was saying. Obviously, he's not going to be.
You got Javon Katoy, you got Justin McInnes, and you got Lucky Whitehead on the damn bench. Like,
that's what I mean.
16.
Whitehead there, it's kind of overrating BC in a sense because he hasn't done much. He can't stay healthy.
I mean, he's still like a 800-yard receiver this year, and they've benched him. Like, that's not nothing. I admit
it's not nothing, but it's
Lucky
not
Whitehead
to the
is
level
on
that everyone thinks it is.
But I'm not even putting him in my starting equation. To me, the starting equation is the big three of Hatcher, Hollins, and Rhymes, who are all exceptional. Javon Katoy, who is a size mismatch like no other, and Justin McInnes, who has been great this year and has outperformed Lucky Whitehead. And then your guy on the bench is Lucky Whitehead, who is better than most of the receivers in the league, right? He's got 800 yards. I think he's like 12th in receiving yards, and he's benched. Like, that's the type of player that the BC Lions are benching right now in the receiving corps. You can critique a lot about the BC Lions. You cannot argue that they don't have the best receiving corps at this stage in the CFL.
It's just a shame that Lucky Whitehead can't play guard.
Or run the ball for BC, because I think that's where this game is won and lost. Yep. JC, you said if the Blue Bombers can run the ball, the Bombers are going to be able to run the football consistently. That's why you voted for Brady Oliveira in the ballot.
The Bombers can run the ball consistently. There's no doubt in my mind that they are able to accomplish that. But if VA can get them up 14 points, the Bombers can't run the ball. That's how this sport works.
They're still going to run the ball.
They're still going
to run the ball.
I welcome them to run the ball then, because you can eat up your damn clock, and as long as the offense keeps ticking, you're putting yourself in a bad situation. It's stupid. You don't run the ball if you need to score points. That's why offenses defeat run games. The defense doesn't stop the run. A good offense does.
Any team in Canadian football ever gets down 14 points, the other team just shouldn't run the ball for the rest of the game. It's only a 20-second play clock. This myth
I'm not saying
needs to be dispelled.
It's happened in 2 straight playoff games. The Calgary Stampeders had a fine running game in this playoff game, and they were more consistent with it than they were the year before when everyone harped on them for abandoning it too early. Kadeem Carey had 75 yards on 14 carries. He had some slashing runs where he got through the BC Lions defense, and it didn't matter at all because they couldn't hit the passing game. They couldn't hit the deep shot. It does not matter. It does not.
I think it's irrelevant to compare these two games when one is in a dome and one is in the Arctic tundra in the city that I call home.
And
it is a completely different conversation.
The running game is essential to ending games. And I think that's a big flaw with the BC Lions, right? If they are up by 20, like they were against Calgary, right, that margin will shrink because as soon as they have to turn down the offense and play more conservative, they can't run the ball well enough to eat up the clock and close out games, and they will allow opponents to come closer to them. That is a real weakness of the BC Lions. Conversely, it's a real strength of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. When they are up in games and they are leading, Brady Oliveira can close out an entire quarter. Nobody else touches the football, and he grinds them down. But that requires the other 3 quarters to go well first. How many times this season, Hodge, legitimately, have I had this conversation with you? Well, Brady was so great in that game, and you said, wow, he really only did it in the 4th quarter. And it's true.
Yeah, that's happened.
Because they get the lead in other ways, and Oliveira is the closer, right? I'm saying the BC Lions offense, if they're on their game, is good enough to prevent them from having a closer, right? If you aren't in a situation where Brady Oliveira is grinding out the clock in the 4th quarter,
but now you're simultaneously you're completely contradicting. You're saying if BC goes up by 14-0 early, this game's over. But also, BC has no closer. They can't run the ball at all. They're not going to be able to kill the clock. Like, no, I think if Winnipeg goes up early, this game, I don't think it's done because it's the CFL, but I think it's a huge advantage. If BC goes up early, obviously you'd rather be up, but I don't think it's a huge advantage early in this one. I think that this game is Winnipeg's to lose. Talent-wise, I think these teams are very close. I think we can all agree on that. However, first of all, home field advantage at IG is massive. Secondly, having a week off while your opponent is playing is massive. And then thirdly, to have that weather perfectly suit and by the way, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers don't practice 90 minutes outside of town. They're practicing on that surface and have every single day this week when it's been cold and rainy and wet and snowing and sleeting and icy and nasty. They're going to know exactly what shoes they need to be wearing, exactly how they need to practice their footing. And the BC Lions, what are they going to do? They're going to fly in on Friday, do a quick walkthrough, which at this point of the season is a joke, and they're going to kind of sort of try to get going, and that's it. Like, that is a massive advantage for the home team. If you throw these two clubs in a neutral zone, I think it's 50-50. With the circumstances being what they are, I think there's an 80% chance Winnipeg wins this game, which is why I'm happy to take them minus the 4.5. Anything under a tutty, I'm taking Winnipeg to win this one. And next week, we'll be sitting here. Actually, we won't be sitting here. We'll be sitting in Hamilton for the Grey Cup ahead of a Toronto-Winnipeg Grey Cup. And Jace will be eating them words.
JC, you're taking BC, right?
I'm taking BC. Yeah, I think that their offense is good enough to pull this upset off, and I loved what I saw from them. And eventually something has to happen with Winnipeg, right? There has to be a crack in the system. And you've noted yourself, Hodge, those last 2 West Finals, they haven't exactly lit her on fire. Yeah, they've won those games.
Did they win? Did they win?
Okay, is that your standard? I guarantee you that's not my
There's no style points. You win or you lose. And if anything, it's more of a compliment that they played poorly and won. Imagine what would happen if they played well.
I'm not discounting their accomplishments. You can't argue that any team has been better than the Winnipeg Blue Bombers over the last 4 years, right? They've been exceptional. My point is they haven't always been dominant. In those last 2 West Finals, they haven't been dominant, and they are just getting older, right? And you lose this game, and a couple of people will probably go to the retirement home, right? It's a team that is long in the tooth, and that's an advantage in many ways, but it's also a weakness in some ways.
They just had a week off. They just had a
And
week
they're
off
first
to
in the
rest
West
their old
Division.
bodies.
And sometimes it takes your
this
body
game-
a while to get back in. Bye
This
weeks can
game
be
was
advanced.
decided. I said this a month ago when they played at Vancouver. This game will be decided. The West Final will be decided by that regular season game. If this game was in Vancouver, the Bombers had just played. They got to go to the Dome where they're not built to win. You're 100% right. Right now, you're out to lunch. The Bombers are going to win this game. And obviously, they're going to come off the mountain at some point. The Bombers will probably stink in 2-3 years because we all know they're too long in the tooth. They're going to lose some good coaches to hires elsewhere, all that stuff. But right now, they won this game a month ago. They did. It's in their building. They have the rest. They have the prep. They have the time. They have every conceivable advantage. There's going to be 31,000 drunk people screaming at the top of their lungs every time Vernon Adams Jr. sets a foot on the field. That's a lot different than playing in the Dome in Vancouver.
Man, the longer this conversation goes on, it just seems like JC's been on a run of this West Coast Kush or something, because this guy is just up in the clouds today. It's unbelievable.
Come on.
I got Winnipeg and the points, okay? I don't understand how there's even an argument about it, but that's fine. We'll put a clown hat on JC in person next week in Hamilton.
Let's go.
I expect the same if the Lions are the ones in the final. I'll get a pair of clown hats for the two of you, because it's about time that we had some new blood in the Grey Cup, in my opinion.
That's a separate conversation. If you want to talk about who should win for the sake of entertainment, or you want to talk about what would bring more intrigue to the game, that's fine. I agree that BC would be a more interesting storyline. That is not the conversation here. We're living in reality, not hypotheticals.